Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I can call you to order. Thank you and welcome to this planning committee. Welcome to today's meeting of the gentlemen. Where's that one coming from? It was so good you want to hear it twice. Have we fixed it? Welcome to today's planning meeting. My name's Mike Johnson. I'm chair of the committee. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. And to the agenda, into substitutes.
We have Councillor Oodle, Councillor Hodges, and we have apologies from Councillor Bill Amos. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Declarations of interest. Councillor Udall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You'll note what I called in application on agenda item number 9. I wish to confirm that this is no predetermination has been made on my part. I'm simply called it in to seek information and questions, and I come through this application with an open mind. Consequently, I intend to stay, speak and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Udall. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are you happy for me to approve them? Comments or otherwise? Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got one comment on page 7 of the minutes. Third bullet point. I'm sorry to have to raise this because normally we just wave the minutes through. But my understanding is that minutes are a record of decisions or actions or votes or things like that. They're not a verbatim report or verbatim report of what's said and done. Now, this is no question, nothing to do with the minute taker who always produces superb and excellent minutes. So it's absolutely nothing to do with that. The point I'm making is the question of what can be put on the minutes at somebody's request. As I say, is it decisions, action taken, or votes? Then that's obviously acceptable. And a bit of narrative background obviously is acceptable as well. However, if a member is going to have put down on the minutes excuse me, a feeling, then we can all play that game, I'm afraid, and we can all put things down and have it minuted. The particular issue here was I'd called in an item, which is my duty and right to do. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I always show a keen interest in what goes on in the ward I represent, unlike the accuser on this occasion who shows no interest in her ward. And therefore, Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid I'm not going to let go. So if this is going to be allowed, then I want a right of reply. And I want that minuted. I think it's unfortunate that we go down this road. So if you say it's allowable, this is allowable, then I will say that I'm insulted by the constant and spiteful comments that come my way after every time I've spoken on this committee from Councillor Hodges. So we can all play that game. I think it's rather stupid and petty, but it's down here. So I'll be guided by your judgment, Mr. Chairman, on how we proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. Yeah, it does sort of slightly jar with the rest of the minutes, which are records of facts and decisions. I mean, my personal view would be to delete it, but I would be happy to accept comments from the committee.
I'm a little concerned, really, that Councillor Hodges is not here today to reply. I feel that when someone has been named, they do have that right, clearly, Chair. And I think it's a pity that she's been named again.
Any other comments, please?
At that meeting, Councillor Hodges did say she would like it recorded in the minutes, and it was agreed that it would be recorded in the minutes. So to not, to delete it would be to go against that previous decision.
Any other comments? If we're going to stick with the minute as recorded, then I think it's only fair that Councillor Amos has the ability to put his point of view within the minutes. Are you happy for that to happen offline? Get a copy subsequently?
Yes, thank you, Mr. I'm happy with that. I think it's unfortunate because we're all in the political arena here. We say things and we just take it as part of the process. So I'm not given to making complaints and issues of that nature. I'm attacked every day in the Worcester News and elsewhere. That's part of the process. So what I'll have minuted then, if we're not going to remove this, is that I'm insulted by the constant and spiteful comments that Councillor Hodges makes almost every time after I have spoken on this committee. And I will continue to respond if it carries on.
Thank you for that, Councillor Amos. Can we amend the minutes and I'll subsequently sign them once both parties have seen the content? Thank you.
I do feel really uncomfortable that words like spiteful, it's sort of down the bullying channel. And I hope that no councillor is being accused of bullying, because if this is going into documentation that will last forever, then I do have reservations as to what image it gives the council as a whole. And I would not want to be associated with that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can happily confirm that it's nothing to do with bullying whatsoever. It's part of the political process that if people make comments about what I've said unnecessarily, then I have the right to respond, which is all I've done here. I had not intended to raise this issue at all, but to have something like this minuted, of course, raises this very issue we're now debating. This is why my argument was that none of these comments are put down. But if we are going to go down this road, then people will have a right of reply. The fact that Councillor Hodges is not here today, well, she rarely is, so that's not my problem.
Councillor Hagar.
I would be very uncomfortable signing such minutes if that were to occur. If the exact wording that Councillor Amos has suggested. Alan, may I? If you could tone that down, I would feel comfortable.
I will have a conversation with Councillors Amos and go try and come up with a form of words which expresses the sentiments on both sides, but isn't prejudiced.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, Mr. Chairman. We can take it offline, as it were. We'll come up with a form of words as long as it's accepted that if we're going to minute things like this, in my opinion, wrongly, but then the other member, so accused, has a right of reply.
Thank you for that. Conservation Advisory Panel. Happy to accept. Thank you. Public participation, I assume we have none.
No public participation, Chair.
Nor public representation.
No, none.
Thank you. So we proceed to item 7, is the Southern Urban Extension. Some of you may have had the benefit of the earlier briefing. If needs be, but I would prefer if we can avoid it, we may, so wish, have to go into private session to consider the legal opinion. Hopefully we can avoid that. What do you think?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. This item is reported to you because in January of this year, the Trust, that's the Worcestershire Acute Hospitals Trust, submitted a revised request for acute healthcare funding via Section 106 contributions. This is despite the fact that the 3 South Worcestershire councils considered the matter in 2019. However, the sum requested is now reduced to circa 1.8 million, down from circa 3.3 million, as explained in the report. There are 2 issues to consider today. Firstly, whether the request accords with the relevant tests in the Community Infrastructure Levy regulations. Those are helpfully set out at paragraph 57 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and they are that a contribution should be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to the development, and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. The second issue to consider today is if those tests are met, and you will have seen from the report that your officers have significant doubts as to whether those tests are met, but if you consider they're met, then having regard to the viability of the development, whether the contribution ought to be secured at the risk of reducing contributions towards infrastructure and affordable housing. It's important to point out that the sum of money that the Acute Hospitals Trust is requesting is not to fund physical infrastructure. It's not to fund the building of a hospital or an extension to an existing hospital. It is to provide acute healthcare services. There's nothing in legislation or policy which says that such a contribution can't be sought. And it's really important that we all appreciate as part of the decision-making today that this is capable, it is capable of being a material planning consideration. The recommendation sets out why, in your officer's opinion, the healthcare contribution should not be sought, why it is likely to not be necessary, and that affordable housing should not be reduced below 20%, and the other Section 106 heads of terms, which are provided as an appendix, should remain intact. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Duncan. Questions, comments? Pat.
Thank you, Chair. Very tricky one, isn't it? I'm going to go for the jugular here, really, because obviously the key thing about this is the viability of the development in relation to this request. And I do find the request is a reasonable one. I mean, it's clearly material, but we also, and for the benefit of the public, I'm going to say that we have our own financial consultants who look at these things very closely. And they tell us whether or not something really is financially viable. And in this case, they've said not. And I have to go with that expert opinion. The reasons, I suppose, are that the development itself will probably not be deliverable at all if we acceded to this request. And it goes, my heart almost breaks having to say it, because I think we all know how emotional an issue it is to have to refuse a request from the Acute Trust. It's pretty heartbreaking, particularly at the present time. So that's pretty much where I am with it. We know that we would get no affordable housing at all if we acceded to the request. We would probably not get a development at all. So I don't feel we can say yes to the Acute Trust, although there's nothing wrong otherwise with the application. Thank you.
Any other comments from councillors? Councillor Amos.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, this is a difficult one, but the circumstances have changed since the original application was put in. And they've changed significantly, you could say unprecedentedly, frankly, as to where we were then and where we are now. Now, this is for construction up to 2,204 dwellings. We're talking minimum, I would guess, on average, 8 to 10,000 people. The facts as we know them are the hospital cannot cope with the current level of population. It cannot cope. It's difficult to get a GP appointment. The GP primary sector cannot cope. The road system in Worcester will eventually seize up because these are what I call satellite developments. They may or may not be in the city of Worcester's boundaries, but the people will be using the city for their services and facilities and work and so on, or they'll be coming through the city. So there's good as extra residents in the city. We know there's a shortage of school places. We know there's a shortage of road space. And when this came up before, it might have been a different one, Mr. Chairman, I can't quite remember. And I was a lone voice, but then I often am, where the hospital had asked for money and we were told for some technical reasons, which I didn't quite understand, but I took the officer's advice and said that we couldn't accept their bid for the money. As I understand it, and the officer will correct me if I'm wrong, here, it is not illegal for us to say we do want to give the money to the acute trust. There are doubts about doing it, but we can do it in certain circumstances unless legally we're told subsequently that we can't do that. But it seems to me if there's a chance that we can give the money, my view would be that we should, because the enormity of the problem, I mean, how come on one hand with this application, we're inviting in up to 10,000 people at a time when the hospital can't cope with the people it's got now? It is madness. And, you know, we may be getting through one pandemic. Who's to say there's not going to be another one, not to mention the huge backlog, which is going to run for years. So I can't see a situation in which we're back to the old normal. And as I understand it also, Mr. Chairman, the give in the situation is that the affordable housing would go down from 20 to 17.5%. As I understand it, that doesn't mean there will be fewer houses. It's just that that 2.5% won't be social. There will be others, perhaps a slightly smaller number, because obviously they're sold for more money. And I think that is a compromise that we should make, because there is no point in having all these people in knowing, and I've never seen the NHS, the acute trust, be so definite about asking for the money and pursuing their request for the money. Previously, I think it was put in possibly as an afterthought, but here they're quite keen on it and they are pursuing it. And to be fair, they've reduced it from just over, well, 3.3 million to 1.8 million. So they actually reduced it. I think if we say no to this, I think people in the wider community will say, what are we doing for 2.5% affordable housing? Because that's the give. And I think it's a price well worth paying. If not, there's no point anybody sitting around this table in future talking about waiting lists, queues, people not getting treatment, not getting diagnoses, because that will be the consequence of not helping the hospital to cope with the burden it's got now, which it cannot cope with. End of.
Chairman, through you, if I may. If I may just pick up on a couple of points. First of all, a point that Councillor Agar made. I may have misheard you, but I don't know whether you may have suggested that if the sum of money that the Acute Hospitals Trust is not secured, then there would be no affordable housing. As I say, I may have misunderstood you. I think it's important to see this maybe in terms of an opportunity cost. But sometimes the best way I find to understand this is that from a viability perspective, there is a cake and it can only be cut so many ways. So if you decided today that you did want to secure some funding towards the acute healthcare services, then that money would have to come from somewhere else. I think you all appreciate that. The point I would like to stress, though, is I very deliberately earlier talked about two issues, and it's really important that you address those in your minds in a sequential approach in the order that I mentioned them. The first issue is whether this request meets the community infrastructure levy tests, basically whether it is necessary in planning terms. And the point there is, as the analysis section of the report sets out, there are big question marks as to whether it's necessary at all, and that the funding formula is such that large developments like this are picked up through Office of National Statistics data. That means that the funding that the trust already receives already covers a large development like this. The same might not be true for smaller windfall developments. But if you decide that those tests are met, then it would be a case of saying, well, where could that money come from out of the cake? One other point I would like to stress, and this is very important, in the report, there is reference to 2.5%, and that was included to try and give you some context and scale as to what circa 1.8 million might equate to. And I can't stress that strongly enough. It is circa 2.5%. It might be slightly more, it might be slightly less. But it is important that you think very carefully about whether those tests of lawfulness are met or not.
Thank you, Duncan. I mean, my view is that this is, to me, quite exceptional. And given that the way NHS funding operates, I think there are two assumptions in what the Duke Trust has said. One is that suddenly all these houses will be occupied. That is very, very unlikely. And two, picking up Duncan's point, ONS actually deals with population growth. And in fact, the funding mechanism certainly used to be, and I believe it still is via CCGs rather than via county or city councils. And I'm not sure that this is something which is actually within our gift, compounded by the fact that we've got multiple planning authorities. Again, doesn't help. And my view would be to go with the officer's recommendation. Andy.
Thank you. A few questions, if I may, or a couple of questions. I mean, I don't always speak with sympathy for all departments of the hospital, particularly its planning and building section. But I have general sympathy for people who are trying to work out of a place which, by the way, is Worcestershire Royal Hospital, not Worcester Royal Hospital, which was built to the wrong design in the wrong place without sufficient funding. They're trying to catch up from that. So I have some sympathy. But as I understand it, there's no disagreement that the funding is necessary, but it's whether we should be the source of that funding. So I'm asking for advice, please. If in a normal planning system, a refusal is leads to an appeal. In these circumstances, what happens is that, I mean, at worst, is there any sort of further horse trading, you know, or is it just a yes or no? It's if the funding must come from other streams, it's not appropriate for planning.
Chairman, through you. The issue here with the funding, and this has been tested in a number of appeals up and down the country, and the report before you talks about an appeal that relates to a site, Newton Abbot in Devon, where this issue was tested at public inquiry, it was a called-in appeal, so there was both a decision by a planning inspector and a decision by the Secretary of State. Both of those decisions were that this type of funding isn't necessary through the planning system. I think it's the Torbay and South Devon Trust challenged those decisions. Unfortunately, the matter never went to a final hearing, so that didn't provide us with the clarity that we were hoping for. But more recently, we have an appeal decision that provides us with a South Worcestershire example. And that's an appeal decision relating to proposal for 120 houses at Rushwick. That was also a public inquiry, and a legal representative for the Worcestershire Acute Hospital Trust and a representative from the trust itself gave evidence at that inquiry. The inspector decided that the request was not required and didn't meet the community infrastructure levy tests. The trust has now embarked on challenging that appeal decision. So if that does proceed, then that would involve a High Court judge making a decision on this very matter. So to provide you with some balance, there are appeal decisions that find in favour of contributions towards acute healthcare, and there are appeal decisions which find against. That just makes this all doubly hard for us all. Our advice to you is to give greater weight to those that are the subject of a public inquiry, and to give greater weight to those where the issue is contested, because it's also important to appreciate that this issue isn't always contested. It's not always contested by the appellant. It's not always contested by the local planning authority. We have to consider how robustly that evidence is tested through the inquiry process. Councillor, to answer your final question about what might happen if the sum that the trust is requiring isn't sought, they wouldn't be able to appeal the decision because clearly they're not the applicant, but they would be able to challenge the decision in due course through the courts if they thought that that was in their interests.
Thank you, Duncan. Just for clarity, does SIL anticipate these sorts of events or not?
Chairman, the urban extensions are SIL exempt apart from retail development. So there wouldn't be any issues as far as double dipping, or there wouldn't be an opportunity for the trust to apply for funding through SIL.
Any more questions, members? Are we suitably confused or clear? Clearly, it's a difficult decision. I mean, it's certainly not helped on two counts. One is we've got multiple planning authorities involved, and the other is it's very late in the day for this. And I fear, certainly my view would be, we should not put in jeopardy progress on the Southern Urban Extension, because that's a bigger disaster than perhaps be taken to appeal over a financial contribution.
I won't rise to your bait on your last point, Mr. Chairman. But can I just ask a question? It clearly doesn't matter to the developers how we divide up this cake, as Mr. Rush said. It's a cake. And presumably it's up to us to decide how we allocate it, because it doesn't matter to them. I mean, once they've built the houses, that they'll be off site, we'll never see them again. I mean, so that's how it is. And we're talking, I thought was 2.5%, it could be less. So for the sake of that, we are not going to give any help to the hospital where the situation is dire. I mean, you're quite right, Mr. Chairman, when you said all the houses aren't going to be built at the same time. The point is the hospital can't cope with any more, can't even cope with one more at the moment, when you've got ambulances stacking up. with the winter coming as well. You know, we'll see all the pictures on the front page of the papers. And, you know, I just don't see the logic of this, because we provide money for education. We're providing money for highways, quite rightly. But then when it comes to health, a fundamental utility, we're saying we're not providing any. So if the committee thinks, well, up to 2.5% of social housing is worth it, then that will be the committee's view. But I think the public at large will think we've got our priorities wrong, and I would agree with them. I think that the situation is unprecedented, Mr. Chairman. If we can't, now we've got a chance to do it, do nothing about it. I mean, nothing is cut and dried. Yes, there are complications and there are issues, but we could do this unless I'm again told legally that we can't. The decision remains ours, does it not?
Can we ask Georgina to comment? Whilst we sort out Georgina. Does the fact that we've got...
Thank you, Chair. Can you... Oh. Apologies, Chair. Can you hear me? Do you want me to come in now?
Yes, please.
Thank you. It is our decision to make. I would suggest we do want to have a unified approach with the 3 district councils between us. If members today were minded that they don't want to follow officers' recommendation, I would suggest that a deferral might be more appropriate to allow time for 3 district councils to be able to discuss the matter further between them, rather than to refuse. At the moment, the council has delegated its decision making to Malvern Hills District Council, and that might be something that members want to consider. But going forwards, your question is it is within your power to decline, and it is to approve the recommendation. It is within your power if members are also minded to approve the payment to the hospital, but that, as Duncan has clearly said, would be at the cost of other contributions from the development to other infrastructure, affordable housing, as there is, as Duncan quite aptly put, only one cake. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Chair. The original application, we wanted 40% affordable homes. Due to the financial situation, we ended up with only 20%. They've already lost a lot of social housing. From what I've heard today, once the houses are built, there will be money for the hospital because the government will fund that. So it's only the amount of money now until people move in that's going to be the problem. And I don't actually see that underfunding by the government now should be why we put a sticking plaster over it by losing affordable homes. So, although I truly believe that money needs to go into the NHS, I don't think it should be at the expense of housing for people who are desperately in need of it. And I'm minded, therefore, to go with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. It was actually only yesterday. I had a resident call me up, and it was a grown gentleman, and he was really distraught on the phone. He'd spent 7 hours in an ambulance with his quite elderly mother, and the NHS is such a concern. And obviously, it's not the detail for this planning committee. But is there some assurance you can give that if we do go with the officer's recommendation, the NHS will receive this funding? Anything you can give, please?
I think that might be beyond the gift of the planning officer. The reality is, in time, the mechanism exists for the NHS to fund through the season appropriately. I don't believe, having worked in the NHS, there will ever be enough and continues to. And remember, this is about not building facilities, this is about revenue spend. So I can't see as it's actually much of a difference to waiting for an ambulance outside the door because the hospital is full, because they're not use this money to build anymore if they could. I think it's a very balanced view, but I would again caution that I don't believe.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, from what you've said in the past, I think that the money obviously follows the patient. So that is very much a government-funded system. And that will kick in as the homes become occupied. The other thing is, I don't know what I'm going to say to the 4,000 people on the housing waiting list if we don't have any social housing at all. That really does bother me. It's something of real concern. There are a lot of people homeless in this city and a lot of people who are in desperate need of something affordable to live in. And that's getting worse and worse in this city as house prices rise. So that's a huge concern as well. And I think on balance, because the government funds each patient to whatever sum it thinks reasonable, that I'm still of the same mind to accept the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Pat. Is anybody happy to second the proposal that we accept the officer's recommendation? Before we
Chairman, I'm ever so sorry to interrupt the proceedings. There's just one point that I think it's very important that the timing of the Trust's request, at the timing of their second request, isn't a material consideration. That's why in the report we've said that it's unhelpful, but it's still a material consideration. Point it's received. The reason I make a point of mentioning that now is that that is something that the Trust has taken issue with over the last few years, that we shouldn't have any regard or put any weight on the timing of the request, and they're right on that. So it's important that you don't factor that particular into your deliberations. Thank you, Chairman.
thank you. You'll
Wish me to propose it, Chair.
Anybody prepared to second Pat's proposal that we go with officer's recommendation? Jenny, thank you. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation? Five. 4. 5-4 against. Abstentions? 1. Thank you, Duncan. Certainly will.
Chair, could I just say thank you to Mr. Rudge for the clarity of his presentation. It did help.
Okay. This application is for Unit 7, Knowsmore Trade and Estate. And it's for the change of use from retail to 24 residential units. There is an officer report for this item and includes Appendix 1, in which is the heads of terms for the section 106 agreement. Can you all hear me? There is one late paper on this item, which is from Councillor Denham, who was unable to attend the meeting today. The application is for 24 1 and 2 bed units at Unit 7 St Martin's Gate. This includes units 7A, 7B, 7C and 7D, which is currently occupied as a Ladbrokes. On the site location plan, you can see the site outlined in red. I've labelled a number of the surrounding buildings to show its relationship to the surrounding development, which includes a supermarket, other retail, a church and a coffee shop. The grey area in between the buildings is a private and public realm, which forms links through the site to the city centre to the west, Lowesmoor to the north, Tallow Hill and Shrub Hill to the east. Slide, please. This is an aerial view of the area. The outline of the conservation area is shown. The building is pointed out and you can see that it sits well within the conservation area boundary. Slide, please. This is the front view of the unit. You can see the signage from the last retail use on the ground floor as pound structure. The upper floors have not been occupied. Slide, please. The centre unit is locally listed, and you can see from the louvers on the upper, you can see the louvers which are up on the upper area. The view is from the area outside the Asda food store. Next slide, please. This shows the 2-storey new build side addition and how it relates to the locally listed building. This view goes across the building with the granary, which is used by Hope Church in the background. Right. This is the view of the rear of the building following the demolition of the adjoining buildings. This is the existing elevations of the building and the existing ground floor. I've shown unit 7D for clarity, which is on the right-hand side. That's currently occupied, 7D. The existing first floor and the existing second floor, which is in the central building known as the fermenting shed. Right. So this is the second floor, and it's that central building, the rest is roof area. So this is the proposed layout. At ground floor, there are 10 units. They're a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms. I've circled the entrances into the building. Around the front of the building, the existing shop windows are proposed to be removed and small terraces created. All of the ground floor units would have small terraced external areas. Next slide. The first floor has a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Next slide. And this is the second floor, which has 3 2-bed units and 1 1-bed unit. This is within the locally listed section of the building. Next slide. This is the proposed external appearance of the building. This is the side elevation looking east. In terms of the central historic building, the windows are proposed to be inserted behind the louvers on the second floor. Windows inserted into the first floor, which would add articulation to the building. This is the view looking west at the side elevation. You can see a zoomed in image of the floor plan and the terraced areas. The large retail window openings would be replaced with railings to form the terraced areas. The windows beyond this would be one-way glass to prevent views into the residential units. Here we look at the proposed front elevation. There'll be windows inserted again behind the second floor. The sills would be lowered at first floor and new windows added to the newer areas of the building. At ground floor, the existing windows be removed with railings inserted into the openings. This shows the side elevations of the original building following the proposed residential conversion with windows and doors inserted. There's also a cross section at the bottom, which shows the rear elevation facing into the courtyard area. This image is included in the report and it shows the relationship with the approved residential block to the south of the site. The nearest elevation would not include windows, but beyond that, you can see that the 7-storey building has a number of windows which would look out and over the proposed converted building. I recommend that the planning committee is minded to grant planning permission with conditions as set out in section 9 of the report, subject to a section 106 agreement, which is set out in appendix 1. Also that the committee delegates to the corporate director of Planning and Governance authority to agree the heads of terms and subject to being satisfied with the nature of such an agreement, authority to grant the necessary planning permission subject to conditions set out in section 9 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Questions for the officer? Amos?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, might be for the officer or the highways officer. The outdoor space, we're talking of 34 bedrooms, so reasonable estimate would be something like 60 people there. Unless there's a ban, some presumably will be young children. We know the social disadvantages of bringing up children with no outdoor space, cooped up in flats, completely unnatural. It's not good to their development. So what is the outdoor space available? Is it safe? Where is it? And on the highways issue, no parking again. So obviously committees factoring in the day when Worcester simply becomes subject to regular gridlock, because unless we're saying that 60 odd people, none of them are going to have any cars, fine. But of course they will, and we all know that. So where they're going to park, I don't know. They'll park somewhere because by definition, they will have to. But the report also says that they can park, including the St Martin's Gate and Asda multi-storey car parks. Now, my understanding is, and I could be incorrect here, that you can't park overnight at the Asda multi-storey car park. You can do 3 for 2 hours, but I didn't think you could park overnight there. And I don't know how desirable it would be to park in St Martin's Gate overnight, because my understanding is that it's empty most of every day of every week because people don't want to park there. So I'm just interested in whether cars will actually be parked as a matter of fact, not whether they've got them or not, because we know they will. So if we can deal with the reality, not the theory.
In regards to the external space, there are small courtyard areas, but these are largely, they've got bin stores, cycle parking, so they're not kind of what you would use really as outdoor. They're more kind of pass-through spaces. There isn't any specific external space. There are small terraced areas, but you could probably get a small patio set or something like that. It's not kind of like a garden. They're more terraced, small patios, I'd suggest.
So you just clarify what the officer said there, Mr. Chairman. So there's no outdoor space for children or indeed anybody else? None at all? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. As is noted from the report, there is no car parking with this site. Clearly, it's a city centre location with excellent links to, the train station, the bus station, so that residents living there may choose not to own a car. But I take your point that not everybody may be in the position that they don't own a car. They may choose to still live there and have a car. But the scheme complies with our adopted streetscape design guide. We've looked at the opportunities for displaced car parking on roads in the vicinity. That cannot happen, so we cannot object to it on those grounds. And as the report says, there is parking available, particularly in St Martin's Gate. You can park in St Martin's Gate car park overnight. There are other car parks within easy walking distance that the residents can choose to pay and park a vehicle should they wish to own a vehicle.
But could the officer just clarify, but not in Asda?
Apologies, I do not know if you can park overnight in Asda car park. Sorry, I do not know the answer to that.
That's a fair point. So it's just that it's in the report. I naturally assumed that it was correct, but if it's not correct, it'd be helpful to know that it wasn't correct.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? I would draw your attention, Owen.
I don't know if I've got confused. Where are the places to park? I don't know the area very well, and can you just explain to me where they are in relation to the flats?
What? Sorry. So in relation to the actual development, there is no car parking associated. This is a parking-free development because it is located in the city centre. But as we have pointed out, should residents that choose to buy the properties still have a car, there is the St Martin's Gate multi-storey car park opposite the site. So there are opportunities for them to park in public car parks. They would clearly have to pay, but there are opportunities for them to park.
Is it not fair to create some allowance for them where they don't have to pay, seeing as it's next to the house?
I'm afraid that would
Because
be,
if it's not, this makes no sense to me.
I mean, that would be down to the developer and the lease arrangements or the freehold arrangements that he enters into. It's certainly not within the gift of this department.
There are 3 car parks within a very easy distance, aren't there? There are the ground level ones, one on Silver Street and one the other side of the road as well, which I believe are capable of overnight parking, even if St Martin's Gate is not. So it's a very sustainable location, in fact.
It's all well and good saying there's car parks, but I don't want to pay where I park my car outside my house. Does anybody else here want to do that? I don't think this is fair. It's all well and good saying there are car parks, but people have got to pay for them every day. It's not fair.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, Aaron, but in reality, that is a decision for the potential buyer resident to make, and it's up to them. They will know the situation. And so I'm not sure it's a material planning issue.
Yeah, just to clarify, this is a car-free development, so there are no parking spaces associated with it. The reason that the report makes reference to parking in close proximity or in the local environs is that's a fact, there is parking there. But the application for members today is for a car-free development with no parking provided, and it is for you to decide as whether or not you consider that as one of the elements of this application is acceptable or not.
yeah, thank you. I would just like to comment, COP26 is coming up, and may I suggest that we do need to reach a stage where not every development we have has a car park and associated negative impact on the environment, and there will be other developments that don't have car parking, so I'm not sure why we're debating it really today.
Thank you. Jenny?
I'm more worried about the amenity space, Chair. It's very small areas of paved areas, mostly for bins and bicycles. So there's nowhere that people can go out, especially if they have children, even if it's children visiting. There's nowhere. And the building fronts onto a busy shopping area where there's a lot of footfall, and it doesn't appear that there's any protection from the front of the building to passing pedestrians. I may have got that completely wrong, but based on the plans, I can't see it. So how far away would footfall be from the front of the building on a normal day?
In where the building is, effectively what they're planning to do is to take out the openings where the existing large retail windows are. They'll put railings across them, and then the built form will be inset. It's approximately, I would estimate, and it is an estimation, probably about 1 metre, and they'll be set back slightly. You can't see it very well on some of the plans. You know, they're all on the case file, but yeah, it's roughly about 1 metre. And they vary. So some of them have the ones that wrap around the corner, and some just have a kind of strip of about 4 or 5 metres in width. So it's similar to what you would kind of on a lot of flatted developments where you get small balconies and things like that. It's quite a small, narrow area. But that's at ground floor only. The upper stories don't have that provision.
Thank you. I'd draw your attention to the late paper which Lynn Denham produced, which I think fairly summarises her concerns, and I think it probably reflects many of the comments that have been made here today.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's very important to take a look at that paper. It's she says that future occupants would be subjected to continual public gaze into their homes. Well, That's not quite true because there is obscure glazing. On the other hand, if somebody were gurning in my front window all the time, I don't think I'd like it. It's the perception, it's the feeling it gives you in your own front room, isn't it? That's the problem, I think, because you really are so close to the pedestrianised area. Car parking, I'm not quite so worried about because there is a lot of car parking in the area. And I'm quite sure if you wanted to own a car living in these flats, it would be fine. But it is really very close to 2 railway stations. There are loads of buses in the area and you have almost instant access to the high street. It's literally meters away. So I don't really have a problem with that. But I think what really bothers me is the lack of amenity space and the worry about people feeling uncomfortable in their own homes. If this were bottom floor commercial or offices or something, and the top floors were residential, I'd have no problem with it. As it is, I think I'm erring on the side of not liking it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really following up Councillor Denham's and what Councillor Agar picked up on the privacy issue. I walk past this perhaps 2 or 3 times a week, so I do use Asda. Certainly it's not a place I would want to live. I mean, you are, I think in Councillor Denham's words, where is it? Living over the shop. People expected to set up homes somewhere similar to Piccadilly Circus. Well, not quite as busy as that, but it's pretty busy. So what about the privacy issue? I mean, are we suggesting, there's a question, that we have flats on the ground floor and they're all glazed glass, so you can't look out because people can't look in? I mean, is that what we're suggesting? Because that would be extraordinary.
Sally, am I wrong? I thought it was one-way glass. You could see out, but you couldn't see it.
It is proposed to be one-way glass, yes.
Look out.
Well, the point is, Mr. Chairman, I mean, if people want to live in these rabbit hutches, that's fine. But having represented Warnton in the past, Mr. Councillor, well, Cleary will know as well, where you have blocks of flats down Cranham Drive, for example, children having to live in flats because there's virtually no outdoor space. Do we want to bring up children in this environment with all the attendant social problems that are going to follow? This is madness. This is simply not a place for residential development. We're cramming every inch of residential in we can. And this is not an appropriate area. If we think this is appropriate, then for goodness sake, go and build flats on top of Marks and Spencer's or in the high street. You know, it's not just rabbit hutches, it's a goldfish bowl, as far as I can see. But if that's what people want to live in, and why is the assumption always that the people who live in the city centre are not going to have a car? Do we assume they all live locally or they all work in the local shops or local offices? Of course, they will work and live all over the place. They'll want a car for leisure purposes. You know, they may not all be doing their shopping every week at Asda. They may want to go somewhere else. So I still haven't had an answer to where the cars are going to be parked, because you're expecting women, for example, with a pram, I'm expecting them to walk from Crown Gate to park, walk back home, and then go back again to Crown Gate to get the car in the morning. Is that what we're suggesting? Because we obviously are suggesting that. I know people have no right to park outside their houses. I accept all that. But to expect them to walk to the nearest car park, you know, multi-storey car park is not sort of thing where you would normally want young women with children to be walking up and down in at night. But if that's what we're suggesting, then fine.
Councillor Roberts.
Thanks, Chair. I'm informed by the debate that the first thing is the city centre a suitable place for flats? Well, clearly it is. If you look at the Blockhouse and Hamilton Road and overlooking the canal, the riverside, it's clearly a suitable place for flats, providing there are sufficient amenities. And those amenities, one would think, includes access to open space, which is needed for the health and well-being of those people that are living in those flats. It seems to me that this site gives absolutely no regard for the creature comforts, you might say, of people living in these flats, and even less, if that's possible, for the children and young people who might be living in. I think it's totally unsuitable, and I'm surprised we're considering it. I would have thought that within our policies, then if we came across, I'm not bothered about the parking, by the way. I mean, you make your decision whether they have a car or not, that's a red herring. But if we say, then it's perfectly okay for you to propose residential accommodation where there's no regard whatsoever for those factors identified by the public health that lead to well-being, then we've got something wrong. We need to be looking more closely at what we even consider. I'm certainly strongly against this.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think that the reality is, and Sim may want to comment, I don't think there's a legitimate planning issue. I mean, we might not like it, but that's why we're here. Are we going to approve it or not? But from an officer's perspective, on balance, their view is, and it is on balance, and it's very finely balanced, it's up for approval, but it's our decision. Sim?
That's entirely correct, Chairman. In relation to the fallback position in relation to this application, there's been a change in the planning legislation, which does actually allow, or would have allowed, part of the building to actually be converted to residential without requiring planning permission. The reason why the application is for us is because one of the units is currently occupied, and because they've come in with the whole of the building, including the currently occupied, then the whole of the development requires planning permission. Whereas if they were to exclude, I think it's units 7D, if that was excluded, then they wouldn't need to come in for planning permission because they would go through a prior notification procedure. So in answer to the question, there is a fallback position only in relation to part of the buildings, but that has informed part of the decision-making process. In relation to the highways issue, this is a car-free development, and it is according with the provisions of the guidance and advice that we work to. But in relation to the provision of amenity space and your decision as to whether or not you think this is an appropriate form of development, that very much is it's a planning balance decision for you. It's balanced against the bringing forward a number of residential units which add to our housing land supply and do actually provide houses at certain sizes for the market to be for people to live in. But at the end of the day, the issue in relation to amenity space, to the closeness of the ground floor to the back edge of the shopping area and the acceptability of that, it is a planning consideration, and it's one for members to make.
Thank you, Sim. Councillor Udall?
Yeah, this reminds me quite a lot of Mayflower House in Gresham Road and Dines Green, which is flats of a similar kind of nature. And I don't know a single occupant of that block who doesn't want to move out because of the problems which such an accommodation creates. Effectively, we're creating little boxes with minuscule residential amenity and no outdoor facilities whatsoever. And I think that is showing total disregard to any potential users who may not have an opportunity to have a choice about whether they occupy these premises or not, and they may be expected to do so because failure to do so would constitute potentially intentional homelessness. So we have to consider that as an issue. I see that the applicant has made a number of attempts to try and market the site, but I'm not sure they've provided sufficient evidence that they've actually done this with any effort or any intent to do it properly, because it appears to me this is a classic opportunity of a location suitable for commercial use, breaking up into small commercial units for light industrial use, an opportunity which should not be missed because there is an acute shortage of that kind of land and opportunity within Worcester, especially Worcester city centre. I, as a small businessman, have nowhere to expand to in Worcester, and when I leave and outgrow my own residential accommodation, this would be an ideal opportunity for small businesses to expand to. I don't believe they've given it that thought and that opportunity, and it's something which I would like them to explore in more detail, which in purposes means I don't think we should actually refuse this now. I think we should be given some more deferral time to allow further negotiation to try and achieve something which is acceptable to us, whether that be flat on the first floor and commercial use on the ground floor, which I think would be beneficial to the community.
The application before us today is for the residential development. That's what's actually being applied for. And I understand what Councillor Udalls is saying, but in the same breath, they have asked, the application has been submitted on the basis of it being 100% residential, and therefore the decision for us to make is that one.
I would take the view that it's not suitable for 100% residential.
But
Case, I think I would like to propose refusal on the grounds of poor amenity, both front and rear.
Councillor Amos.
I therefore second the proposal that we refuse this on the grounds of complete lack of amenity space, inappropriate for residential.
Just on the ground floor or in total?
Sorry?
Just on the ground floor or in total? Is it unsuitable?
The location itself is inappropriate, and this development does not provide any amenity space.
We have a proposer and I assume.
So I'm seconding Councillor Agar's motion, actually.
Councillor Roberts.
No, you asked the seconder to clarify the motion, and he didn't make the motion. So I want to hear what the motion is. The motion is for
Was there a misunderstanding there? I was proposing that the amenity value of the development is poor, both at the front and the rear. At the front because of the ground floor situation, at the rear because of inadequate space.
Before we move on, George wants to give us her opinion. George?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind the committee that we still need to follow the minded to refuse procedure at the moment, because we haven't been to full council yet to amend the constitution. Therefore, it would be minded to refuse on the grounds stated by members, and then the report would come back to committee for officers to give their opinion on the robustness of the proposed grounds for refusal, Chair.
Thank you, George. On the basis of minded to refuse, which has been seconded, those in favour of refusal or minded to refuse? Eight. Those against? Those undecided? Thank you. Can we just repeat that so that Margaret can get the numbers right? Those for refusal. Those against? One abstention. Okay. Thank you. All right, we move on to item 9, New Bungalow Grosvenor Walk. You, Sally.
Applications for new bungalow on Grosvenor Walk. There is an officer report for this item and there are no late papers. The application is for the erection of a new dwelling in the existing amenity space of the existing, is usingly called new bungalow. The site location plan shows new bungalow and the site is outlined in red. The blue area relates to new bungalow and the existing car park, which is used for the staff of the dental laboratory. You can see the arrow. This shows the proposed changes to the site. There are no existing car parking provision on site for new bungalow and access is via the pedestrian walkway to the front. The proposal will provide 2 spaces for the proposed dwelling, as well as the dental laboratory. The access via Bromyard Terrace. There would also be steps to accommodate the change in levels to the site to provide access bungalow. This application is a resubmission of a previous application, P17K04, which was determined under delegated powers on the 22nd of 2017. Permission was for a 3-year period, so the permission has now elapsed. Permission included conditions on matters such as drainage, renewables, external details, samples and materials, external lighting and surface water drainage. These details have all been submitted as part of this permission, so the number of conditions has been reduced, put forward in the report. The only change to this scheme from what was previously approved is that the inclusion of a green roof rather than a cedar roof as originally proposed, and this was requested by the Landscape and Biodiversity Advisor. This is the view along Bromyard Terrace. The narrow nature of the loan can be seen. This is the existing car park arrangement viewed from Bromyard Terrace. Again, across the site towards the rear of new bungalow. This is the view from within the garden of new bungalow towards Nelson Road. So this is looking across towards Nelson Road, and you can see the end terrace for Nelson. This is the proposed site plan. There is no existing car parking provision on site for new bungalow, and it would provide 2 spaces. This is the proposed ground floor plan, and this is the proposed first floor plan. This is the proposed front elevation. Here you can see a section through the site, so you can appreciate the topography. The scheme has been designed to address the change of levels in the area and also to relate well to the local context in terms of relationship with bungalow, but also the 2 dwellings that are adjacent to the site. Proposed side elevation. Proposed rear elevation, and you can see the green roof, which is on the rear single-story element of it. Side elevation. This is the final slide. It shows the car parking relating to the proposed dwelling. But new bungalow as well as the dental laboratory. Also shows the amenity space and it relates to the surrounding properties. Sorry, the slide's been taken out, but if you think back to the original site plan, I recommend to committee that it grants plan of permission subject to the conditions as set out in section 9 of the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On the balance of this, I've got very little concern about this application because I think the application is a good one for the housing alone. However, I do seek some clarification and some reassurance about some of the highway issues which relate to this application. For those who don't know Bromyard Terrace, it's an incredibly narrow walkway, which is also used by cars. I think that's the best way to describe it. There is considerable local concern in the area about obstruction on Bromyard Terrace, and already residents have to cooperate with each other in the morning and park in order and of when they have to leave in order to not obstruct each other. There is no turning head, for instance, in Bromyard Terrace. The Bromyard Terrace junction with Henwick Road is a four-way junction, five-way if you include pedestrian access to the co-op store car park, with Grosvenor Walk, Henwick Road, Bromyard Terrace, and the rear access to the pub of Grosvenor Arms, which is now a residential development with 5 or 6 houses, all requiring car access. That has been a significant change since the last time this application was considered. But now at the junction of Bromyard Terrace and Grosvenor Walk, there is an extra 5 or 6 vehicles with access to that area. You've also got the Grosvenor Arms pub, which is well used and well liked in the area. And most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, the sheltered housing complex in Grosvenor Walk itself, where some very vulnerable people live, who will be actually surrounded by traffic movements if this application proceeds. So I am incredibly concerned about the infrastructure which is available to tolerate any further highway use in this area, and whether the extra use which will be created by this development is over and above what can actually be tolerated by the existing highway infrastructure. My fear, it cannot take any more. It's already over capacity. It's already causing concerns and problems. It's already a very heavily pedestrianised area, and I would be very concerned about adding any further vehicle movements to such a small, narrow routes, especially when it's so popular for pedestrians. And I think that we could be dicing with danger here. But I would seek clarification and assurances about that before I come to any obvious conclusion.
Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and address all of those comments. I agree. Bromyard Terrace is incredibly narrow. It's single track. We have taken that into account, and it is well used by pedestrians. I use it myself, so I know that it is a well walked route. We've taken that into account, and the safety of pedestrians has been taken into account. Vehicle speeds are very low due to how the narrowness of the lane. So we have looked at that and deemed it to be acceptable. We've also looked at the safety implications of the junction, as you say, as you come out onto Henwick Road. We've looked at that, and we've looked at the current accident statistics associated with that junction. And again, we've deemed that it is acceptable. To us, obviously, you are providing parking for the new dwelling as well as the existing bungalow. So that is, we would see that as in terms of a betterment, because you are taking some of those vehicles that are currently parking inappropriately. They will now be able to park within the curtilage of the existing dwelling and the new dwelling. So we've looked at it all, and on balance, we have determined that it is acceptable, and that in safety terms, that it is safe.
Thank you for that. Is it two-way traffic on that road?
It is, yes. And as pointed out, there is no vehicular turning head. Afraid I don't know when it was closed off.
And are we anticipating, if this is approved, that there's going to be any signage to dissuade people from driving up who aren't resident?
That's not something we've considered. It's not been put on application.
Clarify, Chair, that to say that the entrance to Bromyard Terrace is frequently used for the abandonment of vehicles, as it's not visibly seen by other places. And so quite frequently we've had to remove vehicles.
Jenny.
As a fairly local resident, I walk past this site quite often, and actually walk along Bromyard Terrace probably a couple of times a week. There are new houses near the library on Bromyard Terrace, which have increased vehicle, I was going to say footfall, but obviously they're not feet. But also by the Grosvenor pub, there's a lot of new housing gone in. So the junction onto Henwick Road is a lot more congested than maybe even a year ago. So when this original application in 2017 happened, there was none of the extra traffic in the area. Henwick Road's quite busy, and with the road being stopped at regular intervals every time a train goes over the crossing, people sometimes lack attention. It's also a major pedestrian route down towards the river. There's a steep bank the other side of Henwick Road, which goes down, so people use it for going to Asda or going into town. So there's a lot of pedestrian traffic at that point as well, which, and some vehicles don't seem to take much notice of that when they swing in. So I am concerned that it may only be 3 extra parking spaces or whatever, but it's yet more overload of the area. The Grosvenor Walk has had over time 3 bungalows built on it anyway, congesting that little walkway quite significantly. This extra building would take even more of green space in an area that's already quite congested with properties being put up over the years. And I'm a bit concerned that it may be yet more garden development that we take a slightly negative view on. But it's mostly about the traffic along Bromyard Terrace, along the area just before Grosvenor Walk goes narrow, because of all the cars that are now using that space for new homes. So, and the pedestrian issues as well.
Other questions? Councillor Amos?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may be a question for Mr. Manley, because it's a very big question. What's happened to our policy on don't build on green space? Here we're being asked to concrete over another garden. Not because there's loads of open space around, but because somebody wants to make a quick buck. I mean, if you look at the shape of it, I mean, it's absurd to fix this, a new single dwelling into a garden. So that's the first question. What's happened? I mean, presumably the policy doesn't exist anymore. I always feel with Worcester, if you drop a handkerchief on the ground, somebody will put an application to build a block of flats on it. You know, use any bit of space you can get. Here's a garden, we'll build on that. That doesn't matter. So I don't know what the policy on green space means anymore. So Mr. Manning perhaps can satisfy me on that, although I doubt it. The question is on paragraph 8.2, we've got this stupid word sustainable. Every time we use up the world's resources, it is not sustainable. Because if you're going to use brick and metal and glass and all these other materials, they're not replaceable. The world's resources are finite. When they've gone, they've gone. So the idea that this is sustainable, what does it mean sustainable? I don't understand what this word means. And because it's meaningless, I wish we wouldn't use it. The third point is, Mr. Chairman, again, listening to what colleagues have said, who know, I know this as well in particular, just it's near my own ward, but Councillor Barnes lives near and Councillor Euler represents it. It is clearly overdevelopment. You know, I mean, when does it stop? You know, if we build this house development bungalow on this site, what if they put an application to extend? I mean, what, do we say yes to that? Because a bit of space will just fill it up. So my concern is, Mr. Chairman, it's the practicalities. It's also the principle. And there's no, as far as I can see in the report, any concern that we're building over a garden. If gardens are open, fine. You know, concrete the place over. And it's going to make Worcester a less attractive place to live. Because everywhere you go, because you've got a garden, oh, well, build on it. No, a garden is deliberately put there for open space, for quality of life purposes. And we've just rejected another application just now because it had no open space. You know, so here we are, it's another bit we're going to take away. I don't understand it.
Through you, Chair. We do have policies. Policies are the main material consideration in the determination of any application unless there's other material matters that count against them, which means that they are there to guide and there to support the position, but it does not mean to say that we automatically refuse applications. We judge every application on its own merit, and obviously the application has been placed in front of us. We've previously approved it in 2017 under delegation, thought to be acceptable. Again, it's come back in again because it's dropped out of time. So in terms of the assessment, it's been carried out and fully assessed against the policies within our plan. There are going to be circumstances where applications come in for new build houses which do take garden areas, which are considered to be acceptable, and there are going to be developments where they come forward when we don't consider them to be acceptable. Each side is dealt with on its own merits, as I've said, and in this particular instance, we considered that it is appropriate to allow the development in that location because it is meeting the criteria that we would otherwise for the other policies. The question of sustainability, in terms of it is a big question. It is, I think in terms of what we're talking about in the context of this particular development, it's the actual location of that close to existing services and facilities, which would reduce the necessity for people to always have to fall back and use their car. So it's in an urban location, so in the context of what that's talking about here, it is in an urban location. People can walk to and from shops without having to get a pint of milk. They have to jump in their car to drive down the shops. They can walk around the corner. So it's close to public nodes transport, and therefore deemed to be what we consider to be a sustainable form of development. And I think, have I covered all the points you wanted me to cover?
In terms of green space, what's its current state? Is it a garden or is it just a piece?
Currently the garden to the new bungalow. It is the garden, defined garden area of new.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mann, you tried, but I'm afraid he failed. I'm grateful for his efforts.
Pat?
I don't know, there are a few things I noted about this one. One of which was there are no objections, and actually one approving comment from number 28. So they were happy about it. And it doesn't look as if any of the other neighbours are unhappy enough at the time to say much this time. We have approved a building, a very similar building, in fact, on this site before, the only difference being, as far as I can tell, that the roof is slightly different. It's not a sedum roof, it's a native species roof, whatever that means, but there we are. I think the thing about the car parking area, as I understand it, it might cause drainage issues, I suppose. And I think I might like to say, I'd like to see a condition that it was semi-permeable so that it would improve the drainage somewhat. I think that would help if we were going to approve it.
You happy to include that, Sally? Karen?
Apologies for butting in, Chair. I've just noticed that within our consultation response, we have actually requested that a construction environment management plan is conditioned. And I think in this instance, particularly with the narrowness of our terrace, it would be important that one is submitted and approved by ourselves. So I apologise that we didn't include that within our consultation response, but if I would appreciate it if members would consider requesting that condition is added. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely.
Councillor Udall.
Thank you. Two questions. First of all, would it be permissible to make a condition to remove all development rights permitted development rights on this site in the future if we gave it consent, which would prevent any further construction on that area and restrict what else could happen. But I do remain concerned that this is from your terrace, narrow, very small stretch of land, which is a footpath to St Clement's School, a major desire route to St Clement's Walk into the Riverside. It's a route to the library, and it conflicts with access, pedestrian access, to the co-op store next door. I do wonder whether members can actually, unless they've actually been there and know exactly how troublesome this site actually is. And I know it's not normal practice anymore, but I do wonder whether it would be worth a site visit to look at this in more detail, to have an understanding and a feeling for the consequences of this decision, so we can make an educated decision on whether to proceed or not. I like the idea of this application, don't get me wrong. I think the bungalow on this site does make some sense, but I've got very serious concerns about vehicular access and the consequences they will have on neighbours and on other pedestrians who use this route. And I would like to see ways in which any kind of mitigation could be used or engineering could be used and could be supported by the applicant, which would minimise the risk to pedestrians. Something which maybe we want to consider on a site visit.
Thank you for that. Sim?
Thank you, Chair. I think in relation to the highways issues, as you've heard from my county colleague, this has been very, very carefully considered. And the issue that we have for this is that if members were minded to refuse the application on highways ground, we would have great difficulties trying to defend that because it is an evidential base. The highways have been assessed and it has been properly considered, and it has been very thoroughly considered. My colleague very helpfully explained everything that we've looked at, and actually also has personal knowledge of the site. So it would be very difficult for us to sustain a reason for refusal if members were minded to refuse on highway grounds. It's for you to make that decision. This is why you're here. It's my duty to point out if I think there is a particular issue with any particular reason for refusal, if that's the way you choose to go.
Chair, I'm not asking for no because, I'm saying yes but. And I think there's a lot of buts here. I'll rephrase that. There's a lot of opportunity here for us to look at this differently. And maybe I think a site visit might be opportune for us to be on site with highways experts to look at the situation and come up with potential conclusions and solutions which would be useful to allow this to proceed.
I hear what you say, Councillor Udall, but in reality, highways have made a judgment, acceptable scheme as far as they are concerned. And I struggle to see what a site visit would add to that. I don't think, unless Karen wishes to disabuse me, highways is likely to change its mind that this is acceptable.
Chairman, that's the case. We have fully assessed it and we have acceptable, with obviously the exception that I do feel we have missed off a construction environment management plan, which would be important here.
Amos.
Difficult one, Chairman. Could I move that we are minded to refuse on the grounds of the inappropriate use of garden space and overdevelopment?
Hold on to the Marjorie.
I was just wondering if the neighbours have had opportunity to comment on this application. See that there are comments in the previous application, but not to this one. And if they haven't made any, and they've had the opportunity, then
By nature, there are reasons why there are no residential objections or comments, reasons which I don't intend to go into in public debate, but let's say it is a very sensitive area with some very sensitive issues of people who live in the neighbouring areas, which is one of the reasons why I'm speaking on their behalf.
Ali.
We undertook the same consultation as we did for the previous application. No objection to the application. The only.
So we have a proposal from councillor Amos minded to refuse. Is anybody prepared to second that proposal? Jenny. We have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour of minded to refuse? Those against?
Can I ask, Chair, for clarification about the question I asked about removal of permitted development rights, whether that would be an option for the future?
We are able to remove permitted development rights, but the guidance within the MPPG says that we have to have quite good and explicit reasons why we wish to remove the development rights. So I think we can apply that condition, but we need to be quite concise as to the reason why, whilst it can be challenged.
Would suggest for the same reasons which Councillor Amos suggested as reason for refusal would be reasons and grounds for removal of permitted development rights.
Sorry, Councillor Amos, I've got written down for that it's garden space and it's overdevelopment. So that's what you want as the reason why you wish to restrict permitted development rights? Or are you concerned about the level of development? Right?
Yeah. So in that rationale, Mr. Chairman, was the point that clearly this site is too big for a detached bungalow anyway. The idea that you could then build the detached bungalow, a few months later they come along for an extension, which we grant, it makes it even more ridiculous. So, you know, this must be the end of it if the committee is going to vote it through. They can't just add another bit on, because given the history of this site, I mean, you know, there are quite a few applications, and this one's been sitting around for 4 years.
Sorry, so can I suggest something akin to the reason why we would put on that restriction on permitted development rights would be concern regarding the loss of space? Yeah.
And I would suggest increased traffic.
Through you, Chair, we've also got a request for a camp for the construction management plan as well.
And permeable paving.
Thank you. So, Victor?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to not prolong the meeting any further. I think I propose that with the terms and conditions attached, we go for the recommendation.
I think George.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, because I'm sorry, I lost contact for a little while. Are we now, we've just had a proposal for Council Ditter to approve in accordance with the officer's recommendation with 3 additional conditions. I just wanted to clarify that it was the construction environment management plan, removal of PD rights, and an extra condition regarding a permeable surface to enable drainage at the car parking area.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a proposer? Looking for a seconder? So we have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour of approval? Against? Okay. 1 abstention. Thank you. I think that sees us done. All I would suggest, you need to just be aware that we may be in for.
Yeah, we are. We may have. Well, we are looking to start. Obviously, with the additional resources we have at the moment, we are looking to actually determine more applications. So it's looking likely that there may be a requirement for more than 1 committee meeting in November, but we will keep you posted on that.
Sorry?
We will, once we've considered how many it's going to be and also what dates are available, we'll advise.